Absolutely amazing to be in this community. I'm hoping it's a friendly crowd when it comes to systems thinking, because sometimes I'm kind of feeling that I need to swim a little bit uphill on it. So what I'm hoping is that when it comes to talking about the reasons why we need to do systems thinking and the kind of the what it is and how we might go about it, I'm feeling that we're in the same place. However, we need to make sure about that, don't we? And so one of the things that I thought I would do, just to start off with, is share a few slides. And when I say a few slides, I'm kind of lying a bit. There's loads of slides. There's way too many slides. But amongst them, there's maybe 3 slides which I think are key. So what I'll do when we get to them is say, this is one of the key slides, and then the other slides are really just to get from one to the other. But the idea of the slides is just to see if we're on the same page. And we're not on the same page, let's have a chat about it. Because probably that means that I need to change the page a little bit, and I can learn, and hopefully we can move forwards. And so I really like the introduction, this whole idea that we need to work together and kind of identify people in the same kind of space, pulling in the same direction. So the way I thought I would do this is by doing a bit of a why, what, how. And so in the why is it that we do need to have more systems thinking in the built environment? In the what, I'd like to talk a little bit about what systems thinking actually is, and what it is that we're talking about, what are the essences of it, and then maybe the most important one is the how. How do we take it forwards in a really practical, rubber hits the road, real kind of way? So let's have a go at that. So to start off with, all of this stuff has been written up in a document we called Connect to Change. I don't know how many people in the room have seen that so far. Have you seen this? A few have. I would commend it to you because an awful lot of the stuff that I will scoot over too quickly just now is written up quite nicely in there. It took us about 18 months. There are about 200 people involved in it. It was a big co-creation exercise. And what we did was a bit of a reverse Mark Twain. We took a long time to write a short document because we started with something like 50 pages of really good stuff that we collected from the 200 people. But to get it down into something readable, which is more like 8 pages, took ages. So I hope you like what's in there. But if you don't, come back and let's have a chat about it. A lot of people did like what's in there and supported it. And so you can see a whole load of very recognizable logos there from consultancies, from universities, from institutions. Also, amazingly, a couple of government departments. You see DBT and NISTA there, which is absolutely fantastic to have that endorsement. So I think that this whole thing of advancing systems thinking in the built environment is really gaining traction now. Now is the time to make this actually work. So what are we talking about when we say the built environment? This is really just to set the terms, and it's not one of my key slides, but I think it's important. I could actually spend 20 minutes on just this one slide. I won't. And so I think the thing to say about it is that when we look at the built environment, it is a system of systems. Not everybody likes that terminology, but whether people like it or not, it's just a fact. Because we have our economic infrastructure, energy, transport, water, waste, telecoms, all relying on each other, interdependent, because transport doesn't work without energy, energy doesn't work without telecoms. They depend on each other. You can have cascade failure, all this kind of stuff. And then there's social and urban infrastructure that doesn't work unless it's connected into the economic infrastructure. And then we know that the built environment always lives inside the natural environment. We take away from a little bit of the natural environment, we make the built environment. Sometimes we invite the natural environment back in and we plant some trees. But there's an interface which is important. You add it all up, you get a system of systems. That's just a matter of fact. However, the way that we run it is not like that. And so when we see the silos that exist, that kind of go from top to bottom, from ministers through government departments, regulators into arm's length bodies, we see that the structures that we've set up to run the built environment are maybe suitable for what they started with in the 19th century. But what we've got now is not like that. And as we decarbonise and as we digitalise, we're making more connections, we're making it more complex. And so having siloed institutions running a connected system doesn't work, it doesn't compute. We do have something else which is connected though, which is the connected challenges. not least of which will be climate change. But there's a whole list, isn't there, of challenges which affect the whole system. And I think the key thing to note here is that you can't solve connected challenges in silos. You need connected solutions for connected challenges. So again, this becomes a problem given the silos that we've got. I would love to talk about each of these. Don't have time. We're going to move on. The built environment, though, does matter. On a global scale, the built environment really does matter. Not only is it that all those services that we talked about before are essential to society. If the built environment doesn't work, society doesn't work. It's essential for us. But also on the global scale, it kind of tips the balance. You probably heard that a couple of years ago, the total mass of the stuff we've built now exceeds everything that is living. That's kind of scary. But also the built environment is accountable for something like 60 or 70% of carbon emissions. It's the biggest user of natural resources. It means that the built environment matters. But then I would also say, therefore, so do we. Because I'm sure that into this space that we're talking about, we have agency. No one else is going to do something about it. It has to be professionals who work in this space. And I don't think that we should give up on this. I think that we have agency to do something about it, but only if we pull together. This needs some radical collaboration to address. So if we now just summarise where I think we've got, and so this is for me one of the key slides. This summarises what I think are the essence of the problems we're facing. We've got the connected systems and the connected challenges. However, we've got the siloed organisations facing it, and then even if the siloed organisations did something about it and got better at working across the silos, they still wouldn't be able to do their job because the data that they need is also in silos. And so we've got siloed organisations and siloed information. That to me seems to be at the heart of the thing that we actually have to solve if we're going to address these things in a more connected way. Because what the built environment demands, because it is so long-lived and because it's so essential to society, is an approach which is long-term and strategic and joined up. And now that is not what we have been giving it. There are some signs of hope, though, because we've got now a 10-year infrastructure strategy. That's a really good thing coming from government, at least trying to be more long-term. And so there is hope, and I think that now is the time to be doing something active and positive to get systems thinking to work in the built environment. So that is the other side of the coin, isn't it? We've done the big problem. We've said that we have agency. We've said we can do something about it. What do we do? What we do is advance systems thinking in the built environment and drive positive systems change. Because there's all sorts of systems stuff out there which has been proven in other sectors that we can just bring to the built environment. It's not new to humanity, it's just new to the built environment. It's been proven. And so things like systems dynamics and complexity science and cybernetics, all of these things, we can just bring them if we're clever about it. I think we need to. If we're going to do this, we need to do it, I think, with purpose. Really good to have a clear vision as to what we want from the built environment. This is another one of these documents which is co-created and did the reverse Mark Twain thing. I'd commend this to you as well. What this says is that we should see that the built environment itself has a purpose. And the purpose is to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. I like that statement because it talks about people and nature. It talks about flourishing rather than just money measured wealth. And it also talks about generations. And all that is packed into just one sentence. So there's a lot to like in there. But what you'll notice is it says nothing about construction. And one of the things which I think we do, collectively, is that we see the built environment as a series of construction projects. That's always the default conversation if you talk about the built environment. It's talking about building new things. I haven't mentioned that. What it is much more is the stuff that we've already got. In this country, we have 99.5% of the built environment that we need already, and each year we add 0.5% to it. And so that means really we've got to pay more attention to what we've got and get more value from it. And this kind of says, let's see the whole and not just the new stuff. So now we have to see, how do we get to there? If we've got a vision which is based on purpose, I think we need a purpose that is based on outcomes, because what we want are better outcomes for people and nature, surely. And then we can see, how do the systems that we have help to deliver those outcomes? And part of the answer is through the services they provide, but also part of the answer is through our own understanding of the systems so that we can help them, nudge them towards delivering better outcomes. And I think that this ends up being one of the key things for systems thinking in the built environment. So I'll just spend a bit of time on it, and I'll get to another one of my key slides. Like I said, I've only got 3 slides. I've done one of them. So in this move, I think we need to have a kind of a fundamental shift in mindset, because the prevailing mindset in our industry is a project-based mindset that looks something like this. It's very linear. It starts with planning, as if that's the first thing ever that happens, and it ends with handover. Throw it over a wall to somewhere, who knows where. But it looks very linear. But then we notice that it always comes from something that pre-exists. There's no such thing as a greenfield site anymore. And also, when we hand over, it hands over into something that pre-exists. And quite often major projects go wrong because we don't integrate them into the existing systems very well. And then we notice that what it starts with and what it ends with is actually the same thing. So why don't we kind of flip it over, join them up, and get a picture which looks more like this, which is a systems-based view of the world. It kind of says, let's put the system at the center and recognize that the whole value is in the use of the system. And then every now and again, we want to plan, design, and do that kind of stuff. It's really useful. Projects are still the best way of getting things done, but they sit within a systems context. So, like, please, can we change the mindset? Because when we only focus on the kind of the project-based mindset, we miss stuff. Here's just a quick example of it in the circular economy. If we see the circular economy through a project-based mindset, the only thing we can do is reduce construction waste and increase recycling. Both of those are good things, we should do it. However, if we put the system at the center, then suddenly we can see that the circular economy is about maximizing the value of use of the systems. And then we can unlock all sorts of other ways of having circular economy. The change of mindset really is saying, at the moment, we seem to think that we do a project and we get an outcome. That's not true, is it? Because I just spent all of my time saying there's systems in the middle. We need to recognize the systems and understand those. And if we're doing that, we can see that projects deliver outputs and the systems deliver outcomes. We kind of need the language to be able to cope with this. And if we now have this picture, which is a really oversimplified view, but I think helpful, we can see that what we need to do if we're going to apply systems thinking in the built environment is start on the right-hand side of the page. Understand what we're trying to achieve, the outcomes, start with that, define those. Then the next thing is to understand the systems that deliver the outcomes, which means understanding the elements in the systems, the connections, and also the influence from outside the system's boundary. We know all this, but it's not how we do it. Because what the industry does is resolutely focus on the triangle. Always will start and default and like a rubber band snap back to talking about triangles. And what we have to do is talk about squares and circles, because that's the route to getting better outcomes for people and nature. And importantly, I think, getting better outcomes per pound. That should be our objective function. And I think what we very often aim for is minimizing the cost of outputs rather than maximizing the value of outcomes. This is a big change of mindset that I think collectively we can bring about. The kind of systems that we need to deal with are physical systems. Those are the easy ones. You can easily define those. The people systems are difficult. And also actually now informational systems, which are becoming real things. And the connection between them is really important, so let's understand them. And then we can get all sorts of interesting solutions when we start to look at the connections between them. So this one in particular, between physical and digital, you can imagine digital twins all over the place and then joining them up, and that is infrastructure. And so this is very close to my third slide, because in that paper that I shared, Connect to Change, we put forward 9 recommendations. You can see them here. The 3 in blue are largely pointed towards government. The rest are for academia and industry. They're connected in a nice systemsy kind of way. They get unlocked by these ones at the front. We think that the way of delivering them is through a structure that's remarkably similar to the one that you came up with earlier on, where you can see the communities connected in this kind of zooglial kind of way, some kind of steering, a coordination group, and we're making a distinction between the oversight and direction compared to the delivery and the management. That's just the only difference, I think, between this structure and the one that we saw earlier on. But then what you've clearly got are some communities which are set up to do some stuff. You've got some recommendations, so it kind of it aligns itself with a very simple kind of structure like this. And so this is what we're kind of working on now. We think there's some doable stuff, doable actions, best done by communities in collaboration. So we're trying to coalesce the communities and connect them so that we can drive the change. And that's why it's my third slide, because it's got the 3 C's. Coalesce communities to drive change. Thank you. 3 slides. That's all I did.
You've always been a systems thinker, but I get a sense that actually as we go through our careers, we end up with a sense of learned helplessness around how much we can change. So what was your progression towards actually getting involved in systems change and activating communities around that? Because that's a big step between understanding systems change, but then becoming somebody who's really active in creating that change and creating that community. When did that happen?
Yeah, I think it is a really good question and quite a serious one actually, because I can point to something that made that change for me, because I was a process engineer. I worked in the water industry. As a process engineer, you can kind of see how connected things are, because clearly the wastewater treatment plant is connected to all the sewerage, and then you find out that the sewerage doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from the water. And so you can kind of see that there's connections. And so that kind of sense of connection and systems was sort of there. But the real thing that made the switch for me, the switch that you're asking about, was something called the Infrastructure Carbon Review. So that came out in about 2013. And what this was, I think, is really significant for the change that we might kind of collaborate on just now, because the Infrastructure Carbon Review was something that was sponsored by Treasury. It was supported by the Infrastructure Client Group, which is a grouping of the UK's major infrastructure clients, most kind of forward-looking ones. They would all be very familiar to you, the likes of Heathrow and Anglian Water and Transport for London, all these kind of big client organisations. So sponsored by the Infrastructure Client Group with a Treasury logo on it, this thing called the Infrastructure Carbon Review brought together people from across different sectors to see what we as an industry could do to drive down carbon. And what I found was that when you go around speaking to different people in different sectors, there's an awful lot of commonality, and it just takes a little bit of connection, a little bit of joining leadership. It's like a little bit of input energy into the system to make the connections to get to something that is joined up. Whereas before it's not joined up and it's just all atomized. And this thing of seeing the power of connections and the way you can make connections with actually very little energy input was a revelation to me, because then we published the Infrastructure Carbon Review, Treasury logo on it, people paid attention to it. It's now turned into PAS 2080, which I think a lot of people will have heard of, and we are genuinely driving down carbon in the infrastructure industry. And you can think that made an outcome. Yeah. So why don't we use the same type of approach for systems thinking? And that's actually what we're trying to do on those recommendations I had. Recommendation number 1 is about doing a built environment systems review and effectively trying to follow exactly the same trick. Treasury logo on it, supported by the infrastructure clients, delivered collaboratively, put a little bit of connecting energy in it and hope that something good happens.
I think it's really interesting to hear that. And I think, what that speaks of to me is this collaboration. I find, though, day to day, collaboration is a great word, but it's very, very difficult to pin down and to really engage people in it, because we're all kind of, first of all, trying to get on with our day job. And most people are overworked, underpaid, overstressed, struggling to get food on the table and get their job done and everything else. So the idea of taking time out to collaborate and engage in projects, and by the way, thank you everybody for being here today, because we obviously have taken time out to do this. It's not that common. And that idea of contributing to something altruistic with your professional skills for a cause which is potentially very, very far off, when actually we're used to working on this project. How have you managed to engage so many people? Because you were talking about 200 people in this connective in a way that is really meaningful, and also getting people in the room who actually can create change, rather than just people who like to talk about it and then just go back to their job and, you know, think, oh, I had a great day out. How are you getting the right people in the room and activating that altruism, you know, to really create change?
You do ask good questions. I'm going to have to ask you a few, I think, later on, just to get my own back.
No, my defence is asking you the questions.
So I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff in what you're asking there that is really important. I mean, firstly, I don't think that this is something that is just altruistic, as if it's something that we have to do because it's good, but it's a bit painful and no one will pay for it. And it's kind of one of those things which is, you know, just a sort of a bit of a wishy-washy nice thing to do. I think this is absolutely essential. If we don't sort this out, then we're stuffed. You know, those big challenges that I talked about, you know, these are serious things coming at us. And if we don't address them, then we are in serious problem. You know, so this becomes a real thing that we have to address. And it's not just climate resilience, you know, that's going to be a really big one. But, you know, it's energy security, it's biodiversity, it's things that humanity will depend on, need to be addressed. So I don't think it's just altruistic, you know, I don't think it's just a nice thing. And to my mind, the way that the collaboration works is by aligning towards shared outcomes. Now, I've seen this in other aspects of my career, and it's a very simple kind of rule, I think, that if incentives are aligned towards kind of pre-agreed outcomes, you've got a chance of getting there. If the incentives are misaligned, if they're pointing in different directions, there's no way that you'll ever get to those desirable outcomes. And so I think a large part of what needs to be done in this space is about an alignment of incentives, but to do it on purpose. Because at the moment, very often what happens with people's incentives across the board is they're just what they are. You know, no one's actually thought it through and thought, what kind of outcome do we want? And let's intentionally design the incentives towards those outcomes. You know, that would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be sensible. Instead, what happens is we just have kind of default incentives that we might have received from the 1950s that are pointing in completely the wrong direction, and therefore we get the wrong answers. And I think that out of those three systems I talked about, you know, the physical, organisational, and the informational, the one that really needs the sorting out is the organisational, and the connections between them are usually to do with incentives and constraints which are put on us by other organisations. That's what we need to sort. And I've found in doing this work in this co-creation that there's been a real recognition of that. You know, it's like, yeah, that's right. So let's get on with it.
Yeah. I've found quite often in my work in the built environment that we have this generational, hierarchical difference between what we want to see and what we want to change. And at the top of organisations, I think there's a lot of language around, yes, sustainable development, and, you know, but actually just paying the bills, you know, paying the salaries, getting more work in, keeping that company solvent, keeping it running is the name of the game for the senior executives. All this stuff about sustainable development is really good for workshops and brochures and, you know, pitches for clients and projects. But actually, when you're just trying to run a business and keep it competitive and keep all of your staff employed, the talking about sustainability and these sorts of initiatives does present a risk. Because I do think there is a risk at the top of business. We can all look at CEOs of organisations and go, boo, you know, you're running a polluting organisation. But actually, quite often when a business is making a profit and it's successful, there's a sense of just going, right, nobody move. Don't change anything because we're running a successful business. And actually change is a risk, change of any kind. So what do you think, you know, and then, you know, this idea of, well, we want to protect future generations, you know, we want to protect against future climate impacts. is a lot less compelling than I've got to pay my staff this month and next month and the month after that, and I've got to try to win jobs off my competitors. So how do you speak to senior leaders who tend to be much more focused inside on the organisation, much more navel gazing, rather than looking outside at the rest of the world and worried so much about that, where I think there's a generational thing where younger people are much more concerned about social justice and climate action and are saying to the CEOs, you should change, without necessarily appreciating those competing objectives at the top. So how do you speak to senior leaders and get them along on this journey when their objectives, maybe it's exactly as you said in the last question, what are those incentives that you can bring to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is related to the last thing, and this this kind of structure, the system of organisations which you get when you have a chain of incentives and constraints. So let's just talk about that a little bit, and I think particularly related to our industry, where you can see major client organisations, the owner-operators that I talked about before. If you look at the constraints on them, they come really from their investors and from the regulators. And then the regulators live inside a box which is created for them by the policymakers. And so you've got this kind of chain of incentives and constraints. But it doesn't stop there, because the client organisations then put their own incentives and constraints going further down the supply chain, on the contractors, and the contractors do the same thing on the suppliers. And so you end up with this chain of incentives and constraints that basically ties the organisations into the behaviour that they've kind of always had. The thing that I think we're advocating with this simple triangle, circle, square thing is to be starting with a proper dialogue about what is the outcomes that we actually want. Do we want it to be that companies make loads of profits, that some kind of shareholder somewhere makes lots of money, but the planet is destroyed? And like, is that actually the outcome that we want, or do we want something different? You can have what I think needs to be an intensely democratic dialogue about what outcomes we the people actually want. And I just put a little kind of side note on this. When you look at the conversations that we actually have, they're almost always arguments about the triangles, about the projects that people are going to do. We don't have informed conversation about the outcomes that we want. And I suggest that by having conversations, much better informed conversations about the outcomes that we want as a society, we'll find a lot more agreement than arguing about the interventions, because we're not good at starting on the right-hand side of the page. And so I think, even though I'm saying this in quite an arm-wavy kind of way, I think it's exactly the same thing when discussing it with senior leaders in any kind of boardroom. It's starting with, what do we actually want to achieve? And if the most important thing is short-term profits, then we're probably not identifying the right outcomes, are we? And then, as I've said with my circle, triangle, square, we can work out how the system works and maybe how to tweak some of the incentives so that we're not just doing some nice systems thinking, but we're actually driving some positive systems change. And if I may on that one, I think we do need both, because it would be really good if we can advance some systems thinking. It brings so many benefits, as we've briefly discussed. You get better outcomes for less input in more lasting ways. What's not to like about that? However, it's not enough. I think we actually have to change some of the systems. And that's not news to you, because you've all gathered here because you want to change the systems. But I'm just trying to kind of articulate it in terms of outcome systems and interventions.
Yeah. Yes, well, I would agree with that, given what I do for fun.
Could I ask you one back before? Is that
of course,
okay?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Because I think that this place of kind of challenging existing systems is really key. And so I'll be quite keen to hear kind of back from you. When you look into the systems that you most deal with, what do you see there that is fixed and unchangeable, and what is the things that you could actually tweak with a bit of kind of focus on outcomes, a bit of changing the incentives? I mean, do you see in your area do you see any hope of doing this systems change?
Yes, 100%. I mean, my theory of change is that, so my background is I'm an engineer by background, I work in the built environment, but have become incredibly frustrated over time that very often when we're working on projects, there's just, people say they want to change, but then they're all saying, well, engineers will change the advice we give when the client changes their brief. We'll do more when we've got more money available. We'll, comply with different regulations when government changes the regulations, and there's always, it's that triangle of blame, isn't it, of like everyone pointing the finger elsewhere. So it kind of became clear to me that we were saying over and over again on projects, we want to be more sustainable, putting forward solutions, that we've been upskilled ourselves on sustainable solutions, and then they were thrown out, they were value engineered out because it wasn't a compliance necessity and there wasn't enough money to do stuff that wasn't, really above and beyond compliance. So I sort of thought to myself, well, bugger it, let's change compliance. If you have to do it, you have to do it, and suddenly you've got to find the money, because if the regulations change, the magic money tree suddenly drops its harvest, and things can be done. So it kind of occurred to me that systems change could really happen if you change the compliance model, because then you don't have to care about the polar bears and the melting ice caps. You just have to care about making money and running the projects in exactly the same way. So I think when you ask about what I think is immovable, I don't think for me it was that anything's necessarily immovable, but it was about the pace of change. And I felt like trying to get the whole built environment industry to care enough about sustainability that they were going to change the way that they worked, for me felt glacial in terms of to push the climate narrative. But to try and wait for that to change felt too slow. Whereas I found an intervention by meeting with lawyers. So as an engineer, people often ask me as a legal activist, am I a lawyer? No, I just had to learn about the law through this. But you can change the law and then you change everything, because then it's not even about talking to the sustainability people or doing CPDs. It's basically the risk managers get involved, legal counsel get involved, the insurers get involved, and the CFO is involved then, and everyone just has to comply. And that for me felt like one lever that you could very easily push and have like a big change.
Yes.
So yeah, that's my kind of theory.
And I mean, I feel that fits very well, this sort of understanding of organisational systems in terms of incentives and constraints. Because what I think you're talking about there is changing some of those incentives. So even if the people in organisations don't care about the big outcome, they only care about their own little local thing, at least that incentive is aligned towards the big outcome. And then everything lines up and off we go. And I think the thing which I'm pointing to is where they're misaligned, it's actually impossible to achieve the outcome. And I think that what you're doing, therefore, is helping to kind of, you align the magnets towards the compasses towards the outcome that we want.
Yeah, I think, yes, and I think all of these things are necessary, aren't they? So I think I've become it saddened me actually to hear a lot of professionals slating activists, when and it continues, because I think we are all part of an ecosystem that relies on one another. So we need the professionals, the senior people who are really embedded in their networks and in traditional institutions, who are speaking this language, so that as the activists are helping to spread messages and open up people's minds and put things on the front pages, that seed is falling on fertile ground. And actually we're then ready with all of these different layers of action to push forwards. It's that shifting over to window, isn't it? And I think, so we all need to support one another, and every single part of this is part of the community. It's just we've got our militant wing, and then we've also got our traditional arm, but we are all pushing in the same direction and ought to be supporting one another.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that feels much more like the kind of the radical collaboration that we need. And I agree. Everyone's got their part to play. It would be great if they knew that they're playing that part towards some shared outcomes. And I think that something shared is really important in this. is like a kind of shared understanding of the outcomes, but also a shared understanding of how you can bring about systems change so that we work together in the same direction. And this, for me, feels like one of the most important things, is that if we all pull, but we're pulling in different directions, you go nowhere. If you all pull in the same direction, then you go somewhere, and you can go pretty quick. And that, to me, seems like what we need. And it's the idea behind the connective. You can, here in the name connective, it's not trying to be a new silo. It's trying to join up silos. It's saying, let's pull in the same direction. But I don't think we can pull in the same direction unless we know what direction we're pulling in. And I also think it becomes important for us to understand the system that we're working with, rather than what feels like happens at the moment with our projects, because that's a little bit like pin the tail on the donkey. We keep choosing projects and doing another triangle, and then another triangle, another triangle, without understanding the circle and the square. And I think that the faster way to get to a better outcome is to know what we're aiming for, but try to understand the system. We can't master it, we can't be in control of it because it's complex, and we need the humility to realise that, but we can understand it better, and then we can nudge it towards the better outcome. But we won't even get there if we don't at least try to understand the system.
So community then, and pulling together, is so important. Obviously we've got EWB and this Systems Change Lab, and the next plans, the steps going forward, which the team at EWB will tell us all about. What about the connective? Can you tell us what is that and what's your plan and how can people get involved?
Yeah, so the connective, you saw, it's a splat. It's a berry splat, and we kind of drew it as a splat to make it look kind of organic. And so at the moment we have a number of communities. You probably didn't have time to read them, but there's something around clients, consultants, academics, systems experts, and there's people in this room who are already being sucked into this thing. But the point of it being organic is that there's space for all communities. What we want to do is join people up to make something happen. And so if there's anyone in here, or even if there's kind of engineers without borders say, yeah, this is a good thing, we're already doing this, we're part of this, we're pointing in the same direction, that means you're in. It's a very low barrier to entry, this. It's like, if you agree, you're in. But more seriously, by having this kind of conversation, we can identify that we do agree, that we are pulling in the same direction, that we are part of the same thing. So what the connective is just making connections to get something shared done. That's it. Pretty simple.
And how do we join?
You've already joined if you agree.
Oh, right. Nice.
Yeah.
It's like Extinction Rebellion. You just have to show up, that's it. You just, yeah. Okay. Right, so we've had a quick chat. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. So does anybody have a burning question?
You said people and nature.
Yeah.
What if people were part of nature?
People are part of nature.
Exactly. So
there's some interesting kind of semantics in this, because in the built environment, and the built environment industry in particular, it's actually a big step just now just to get the industry to realise that their solutions should be even people focused. Because there's such a strong focus on projects that it's difficult to get the movement towards having a built environment that is good for people. You can think of a number of built environments which are really bad for people. So just getting built environments which are good for people is a step forwards. We're trying to say it's not just people, is it? It's got to be good for people and nature, because people don't thrive if nature isn't thriving. I think it's another step beyond that to say, well, actually, people are nature. I think where most of the built environment is at the moment is that if you didn't mention people, if you just said nature, they would say, what about people? So it's one of these things where you can't win. I think it's okay to say people and nature, but recognising that people are part of nature.
The amount of renewables infrastructure and arguably thinking about systems that's happened in China in the recent past has been absolutely startling. That's partly because there's less inertia and that their industrial revolution's less than a lifetime ago. But it's also because there's a body that sits at the top and is the first three links marking your sort of, your what was it, chain of incentives, can decide what its own regulations are, has a finger on the scale when it comes to industry, and can plan arbitrarily far ahead because it doesn't have to worry about terminates. Do we look at China and think we need to learn some tricks? We could come up with some ideas from this, or do we say the context here, government, industry, regulatory, and society is just so different that we need to do these things in our own way, solve these problems in a different way?
Yeah, it's a lovely question, isn't it? I mean, we really need more time to give all of these things kind of the attention they deserve. But I think absolutely we should learn from China, but we should just do a lot of learning. Learning is a good thing.